Most property owners in Harris County have until this Thursday, May 15th, to protest the appraised values of their homes, businesses, and land, which helps determine how much they will have to pay in taxes. Property owners in Harris County have until 5 p.m. Thursday or 30 days after they receive value notices from the Harris Central Appraisal District to file protest in an attempt to lower their appraised values. To tell us how to get about this process, we welcome Roland Altinger. He is the Chief Appraiser for the Harris County Appraisal District, a position he has held since July 2016. Roland, good morning and welcome to Hello Houston.
Well, good morning, and thank you for the invite.
All right, let's get the name right. Is it Harris County or Harris Central Appraisal District?
It is Harris Central Appraisal District.
Now, how did we leave county out?
Well, the office used to be called the Harris County Appraisal District, but we wanted to create some differentiation between the Harris County Tax Office and the Harris County Appraisal District. The Harris County Appraisal District is responsible for appraising all the properties in the county, and then, of course, the tax office is part of the collection of all those taxes.
So it's still HCAD either way you look at it.
Yes, sir.
Yes.
So
Still
we'll go
wants
acronym.
still wants
That's
our
right,
money.
HCAD. So Roland, I have protested every year since 2020 with mixed results. Why should homeowners protest their appraisal, and how does the approval process happen? Because it feels like it goes back and forth whenever we're getting our actual value.
Well, first of all, we appraise 1.9 million parcels in the county,
Wow.
and we do that every year. And I tell folks, God did not descend down from heaven and say the values are correct. You cannot buy that many properties and not make a mistake.
Right.
But to your point, I used to have more or less, posters and everything before everybody got on PowerPoint, right? And I would go down and protest.
Really?
And my experience was the first person you talk to will be very nice at hearing what you have to say and has the authority to maybe reduce you 5 to 10%.
Oh, they can reduce you as low as it needs to go based on the evidence that's presented.
Really? It's that first person you talk to?
That is correct. And we resolve about 80% of those hearings at that point.
Yeah, I resolved several that way. But occasionally I would go to the 3-person triumvirate. Mm-hmm. Does that still exist? The reason I say all this is I have a company do it for me now, so I haven't been down there in a while. This is still a 3-person panel?
Yes. If the property owner's not satisfied with the recommendation by the appraiser in that informal meeting, then the property owner or business owner has the right to go to the ARB, which is the Appraisal Review Board.
Now, Roland, when we're looking at, real estate here in our area, in this time of stagnation, why do appraisal prices still continue to go up?
Well, I tell people it is what we are doing as buyers and sellers in the marketplace. And, up until 2 years ago, we had low interest rates. We had interest rates at 2.5%, which is just cheap, inexpensive money. And if you were to look at a $400,000 house at that point, your principal and interest would be about $1,600. Well, today interest rates are at 6.5%. With interest rates at 6.5%, we have that purchasing power reduced from a $400,000 house to a $250,000 house. So not only is your purchasing power decreased with the interest rates going up, we've seen the inventory. 2 years ago, we were looking at a 1-month inventory of properties on the market. Now it's 4.6 months, and the national average is 3.5. So we've seen the inventory go up, and of course, scarcity is one of the things that drives that value. Mm-hmm. So with the inventory going up, we're seeing prices stabilize.
Mm-hmm. I honestly think y'all do a really good job. I think most of the appraisals that I've ever had are pretty fair. But let me ask you a couple of questions. Okay, sometimes it's a pool makes your property prices go up. Sometimes a pool makes them go down. Sometimes a single-family home is higher than a multifamily area, even though these multifamily fourplexes will cost more. So you can have a smaller place on property that costs $1.5 million, whereas the house next door to it is $1 million. But yet the $1 million gets a higher appraisal per square foot because of the property, whereas that doesn't mean that that's what the value is.
Well, you bring up some good points. First of all, the pool example is it's one of the principles of contribution. And the principle of contribution says, you can go out there and spend $60,000 on a pool and put it in your backyard. It might not return $60,000. And of course, in this county, it doesn't. It returns probably 25 to 30% of the value that it cost you to put that pool in. Whereas if you take a house in an area of gentrification and you put some fresh paint on it, you might get more than what you spent on that paint to make that house looking better.
So this is just one of the things you need to argue if you feel like your appraisal is too high.
Well, one thing we don't do is we argue. We try to determine
we
try to
argue.
fairly allocate that market value. And,
Okay.
and so in the process, if the property owner has evidence of their property where they have foundation issues, for example, and bring in the estimate to fix that foundation. We've got a lot of houses in the county that have foundation issues because of the gumbo soil that we have underneath these houses. So they bring in a cost estimate, what it costs to do that repair, and bring in the pictures, and we reduce the value based on that.
We want to remind you, you're listening to Hello Houston, and we're speaking with Roland Altinger, the Chief Appraiser for the Harris Central Appraisal District. Now is the time to get your questions in for Roland. Give us a call, 713-440-8870. Are there limits on how much and how often the value of somebody's home can increase?
Yes, and you bring up a great question in that in 1997, the legislature passed what they call the CAP bill, and it applies to a homeowner if it's the second year that they qualify for their homestead exemption, and we need to talk about that because that's another great savings that property owners can avail themselves of. But in that second year, it's limited to a 10% cap. And let's say the market that we had a few years ago, we had houses going up 20, 30, and 40% in consecutive years. And, of course, those property owners that had the homestead exemption were capped at 10% per year.
Do they ever go down?
Yes, they do go down. In fact, we have this market that has changed now. And when you look at the 1.5 million notices that we've got on the street out of the 1.9 that we appraise, we've got roughly 12% of those population the population of those houses that are going down this year. 32% are decreasing, 56% are increasing, and 12% are no changing from the previous year.
You talked about the street. I have to ask you, Roland, I've seen HCAD cars in my neighborhood. I saw this the other day. What are they doing? That was just kind of off the top.
I can tell you what they're doing.
What are they doing?
Well, one of the things that we have to do because of a standard that we're under, and it's called the Uniform Standards of Professional Appraisal Practice, we have to visit the properties every 4 to 6 years.
Okay.
So if people are taking out permits, we will get those permits. We'll go and view that property. And then, of course, if any new construction is occurring, we go out and look at those properties.
So while we're on this subject, I turned 65 in June.
Oh, my God. No
I
way.
look amazing.
I don't believe that,
I don't
Frank.
either. I know.
Frank has a great doctor.
I know, right? Several, not just one. Okay, so I'm going to be eligible for a bit of a senior discount on my property, which we'll talk about along with homestead. Now, I've owned this property almost 30 years. We built this house in 97, so I'm the only owner. I know exactly what's been done to it, and I've been doing it. And y'all been pretty fair to me. For the very first time in my entire ownership, someone knocked on my door from HCAD and started asking questions, and I thought, wow, what a coincidence that I'm about to get a reduction of my taxes, and HCAD shows up to try to get my taxes as high as they could. False? Am I in a false narrative
No,
here,
we don't
Roland?
argue, Frank. We don't argue.
Explain what happened to me.
Well, there's a lot, Frank, that we could.
I mean, I've never, ever had a knock on my door from HCAD until I applied for the 65-year-old exemption. And then suddenly they're knocking on my door.
Well, that's just
Coincidence.
coincidence.
Okay.
We're looking at those properties, and you bring up a great point, Frank. I don't believe you're 65, but when you get your driver's license, I'll verify that, and we'll get you your over 65
And I'll be a male
exemption.
gender on that license,
That's
by
right.
the way.
You always
I can't fight. I don't want to be a woman.
No, you don't.
But I respect anyone that does.
But I think the thing that your listeners need to be aware of, if let's just say, for simplistic purposes, your house is valued at $400,000.
Okay.
And if you did not have a homestead exemption, you would be paying $8,000 in taxes. With your homestead, it would reduce that $400,000 house to about $5,500. And for someone that's over 65 or disabled, it would reduce it to $2,500.
See?
So those are the savings that we want the listeners to really look at, because we just put these notices on the street. We need to make sure their correct exemption is on there. So if you would have forgot that you're turning 65, because you might have a little senility setting in, you could sit there and say, I forgot I'm over 65.
Denial is not just a river in Egypt, is it?
We want to remind you can call and ask your questions for Roland right now at 713-440-8870. We do have a call from Joanna from Spring. Hi, Joanna. You have a question for Roland?
Hi, Roland. I have a question about where you get your data from sometimes when the values of properties are increased. I had heard from somebody that the permit offices for like the city of Houston, Harris County, they report all permits issued, the cost of construction on each of those permit applications. They report it to you guys. And that is one of those sources you have. Same thing with insurance claims. Can you verify if that's true? I heard this from someone.
Yeah, one of the sources of if you do any kind of construction in the municipalities that deal with electrical, plumbing, or structural, you obviously have to take out a permit. And those taxing jurisdictions forward us that permit information that we then utilize and go out and look at those properties based on the January 1st assessment date that we have to appraise all those properties.
Well, while we're on that, what's the laundry list? We talked about pools, but like a roof that needs repair, a fence that was blown down by barrel, a tree that had to come down because of, a lot of times after storms, property is damaged. It's not as beautiful as it was. It's not as valuable as it was. What's a laundry list of what people can kind of go through in order to determine whether they should protest?
I think anything that they feel diminishes the value of their property. Okay. They are the expert of their property compared to other properties.
What about next door neighbors? Because a lot of people are seeing next door neighbors being bought for Airbnb party houses. That's a big subject in this town. And if down the street on the corner, there's a big party going on every Saturday night because they bought and they Airbnb or however they share their house, I would argue that's diminishing the value of my property. Would you buy that as an argument?
I would. It's called economic obsolescence. It's a obsolescence that exists outside of the property that you actually own. And that could be if you back up to a strip center, an apartment complex.
What about street repair?
Street repair is temporary. So when we look at the construction for the rail that was done, some of those things were temporary reductions in values to those businesses and properties.
People forget we flood, especially when we haven't had a big flood in a while. But we do. Could you take your charge for flood insurance down to the appraisal district and say, I have to pay $2,500 a year in flood insurance, which means my property is not as valuable as the guy who only has to pay $500 a year?
Well, it brings up an excellent point in that we've had 3 major floods in the last 10, 12 years. And what happens is after that flood, it has an effect on that property. And then there's that stigma that goes away a few years later because people they're forgetful. Yeah. It's 2 to 3 years, and the market rekindles itself. But the main thing that you just brought up is if there is a barrel or a derecho, those properties that were damaged, those property owners can get a disaster exemption. And it's passed for those 2 storms, but in the future they could avail themselves of that. And then it goes back to that January 1st assessment. So if they did not make those repairs before January 1st, make sure you make the appraisal district aware that those repairs have not been done, because we might go out there and there might be damages on the outside, such as the roof, that were fixed, but we don't know what's on the inside. So that sheetrock could still have damage, and that's things that people can bring to our attention.
We have a call right now from Janet from Waller County who has a question for Roland. Hi, Janet.
Hi there. Hi there. How are you?
Doing well. What is your question for Roland?
Hi. Thank you, Roland, for helping. I've been to a protest in Waller County, and it was my initial protest. I stood at a podium with a panel of individuals to hear my protest. And in the corner sitting there was the chief appraiser. I thought that you go up with one person for the appraisal protest, and I thought that the chief appraiser was not allowed to be there. Feels like it would be someone that would sway the board's decision toward the Waller County way, because he's sitting there watching and monitoring.
Well, first
Thanks
of all,
for your question, Janet.
Well, first of all, I can't speak for Waller County, but in Harris County we have roughly 500,000 protests a year, and I have not done a hearing in years. In that, I have to have staff. I've got a staff of over 700 that do that for us. So again, I can't speak for Waller County, but I can tell you that in our county we do informal meetings where we allow the property owner to speak with the appraiser one-on-one, and we resolve about 80% of those at that point. And the residual go to the appraiser review board, as you stated.
Do you think, I think Janet's question was, do you think that having the chief appraiser there had any influence on how it went?
No, that's not. I don't know how many protests Waller County has, and I don't know if the chief appraiser, they
Usually is there.
usually is there or not. I mean, I know some counties where they get 25 protests a year, and the chief appraiser's the clerk answers the phones and looks at all the properties.
And there could be some training going on.
That's true too.
Like the chief appraiser wants to make sure that John's doing their job correctly.
Yes.
There's that. Okay, Don from Clear Lake. I'm not sure what part of Clear Lake. Some of Clear Lake is in Harris County. From Don for Roland. Don, what's your question?
Hi, this is Don down in Clear Lake. I was listening to the conversation, and I appreciate the information, but I was a little bit irked at the fact that I have lived in the county for 30 years-ish, and I just found out that I could use foundation issues as a means of adjusting that assessment. I can go offline with this, but I really think information like that should be very plainly and explicitly provided so people know exactly what they can bring to those assessments. And
that's a good point, Don. Roland,
you.
is there anything on the website that says here are reasons for reduction?
Yes, I mean we have a lot of stuff on our website. Sometimes it's overwhelming. We've got videos on there, how to fill out exemptions, how to protest, and things of that nature. But for this gentleman, what I'd like to do is give you a phone number, and it's 713-957-7811.
Can you repeat that phone number one more time?
713-957-7811, and call and ask to speak to a Scott Christensen, and that's we will get you in touch with an appraiser. And this is something that we possibly could work out with you having to not drive in from Clear Lake all the way to the office. But if that doesn't occur, definitely take your notice of value and file your protest online and do the iFile, and then opt into iSettle, upload some pictures of the foundation issues, and also provide possible estimate, and we'll work with you to settle that.
And we will also try to get that phone number up on our website as well.
Quick schedule of deadlines. So this May 15th, you have to make your protests. But then you'll be given a time to come back to actually go and make the protest, correct?
That is correct. May 15th is the protest deadline, or 30 days after the notice has been mailed. Most of them will be May 15th, but there are accounts out there that will have a later date.
Then you'll tell me when to come down and talk to somebody.
That is correct. If they decide to do iFile and iSettle, where they'll try to resolve it without coming to the office, they won't have to come down unless they disagree with the opinion of value.
And if I go with the one person and the three people, and I don't like what the three people say, I can go to court.
Oh, you got 3 more venues after that. You have binding arbitration, SOA, State Office of Administrative Hearings, and District Court. So you got multiple options.
Thank you so much. It's really been very informative.
Yes.